بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم وصلى الله على محمد وآله وسلم. Although we might not realize it, Islam is a religion of bodies and words. There is a text attributed to the 10th Imam of the Shi'i community, Imam Ali al-Naqi, alayhi salam, upon him peace, entitled Ziyara Jamia Kabira, which we might translate as the grand and comprehensive way to communicate with your Imams. In this text, there is a line that states, وَأَجْسَادُكُمْ فِي الْأَجْسَادِ. Your bodies are amongst other bodies. Our biological selves, the fundamental basis by which we appear as creatures upon this earth, are something we share with all of the prophets and imams, upon them peace. There's nothing overtly mystical about this if we take the route of false mysticism, which only sees a break from the ordinary as truly mystical. But the Quran itself calls our attention to the fact that the biological processes by which we become who we all are today, and by which our children will become the adults of tomorrow, is itself mystical and miraculous. As Surah An-Nahl, verse 78 states, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم والله أخرجكم من بطون أمهاتكم لا تعلمون شيئا وجعل لكم السمع والأبصار والأفئدة لعلكم تشكرون. Ali Quli Qara'i, a great Muslim thinker and translator from India, has interpreted this verse in the English language as, Allah has brought you forth from the bellies of your mothers while you did not know anything. He made for you hearing, eyesight, and hearts so that you may give thanks. At the end of the day, our bodies are gifts from God, and all of the potential we have is derivative of the infinite possibilities God has laid out before us in eternity. And the fact that our religion is a religion of words is brought home by the fact that I am speaking and quoting everything right now, so that we are not simply a collection of bodies in a physical space, but we are filling this moment with meaning through words. So much so that all I have to do is say, وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ. And perhaps some of us have a moment where the created nature of all of this becomes apparent. And we remember, or perhaps see a little bit more clearly, the shining presence of being, al-wujud, by which all of us and all of this is. But for those who do not know Arabic, I must translate those words and say that it means Allah is with you wherever you are. For that meaning, the ma'na, to reach all selves in this room that understand the English language. So this teaching tradition is nothing more than bodies, real actual people, inheriting the words, in this case the Quran, that have come from before, and giving them meaning that is articulated within a particular cultural reality. And that meaning is not confined to simply what we say, but it is also what we do with our own bodies. The revered 20th century Sayyid, philosopher and author of a massive commentary on the Quran, Muhammad Hussein Tabatabai, Allah have mercy on him, brilliantly articulated how every human being has a deen, the Arabic word that we often translate as religion. He pointed out that etymologically, deen is related to dain, which means a debt in Arabic. And so each of us has been given a body by a volition, a will other than our own, and our deen is how we use it. Put simply, we know at the core of our being that we did not make our own selves. But now that we are here, we cannot but use our bodies, and so we strive to understand the meaning of human existence so that we might use it in the best of ways. Do I drink this beer or not? Do I become a doctor or a painter? Do I vote this way or that or not at all? Do I defend myself through half-truths, or do I admit a fuller truth which paints me in a bad light? Because of the nature of reality, as adults, we all must confront these choices, and our choices become who we are. So what does all this have to do with the challenges that Muslims in college or the workforce or graduate school, those that are newly married or have small kids or are still single face? I would argue absolutely everything. Sorry about this. So why is this relevant for absolutely everything? Because in the 21st century, the challenge of faith for us, maybe not for others, this is crucial here, maybe not for others, but for us, is not the maintenance of past cultural forms, whether they be articulated in Urdu, Farsi, or Arabic, but rather the articulation of universal truths that are adaptable to different cultural forms. Let me ask a simple question. Is Imam Mahdi, affirmed in both Sunni and Shi'i theology, just for us, or for the entirety of humanity, the animals, the trees, and the fish in the ocean? Of course, the answer is clear. We would all find it inherently absurd to proclaim that Imam Mahdi is a leader for the Middle East, who has no responsibility towards Brazil or New Zealand. But many youth are not taught Islam that way. They're taught to think that Islam is their particular cultural heritage that they have to hold on to in the face of rival articulations of the universal. For example, they may enjoy watching soccer, the most global of all sports, and they get excited if they see a prominent player with a Muslim name. And then, if that athlete does something that they perceive to be symbolic of Muslim values, they get even more happy. Why is that? Because they naturally and understandably want to see themselves as Muslims represented in the global conversation. But what about all the other athletes? Are they not also human beings created by Allah who are looking for justice upon this earth? Are they not all going to die one day and witness the process by which Allah, glorified and exalted, takes stock of how all human beings have lived their lives on earth? Is not Islam just as much for them and about them as it is for that one player who identifies as a Muslim? When we overemphasize the representation of Muslims in public spaces, we sometimes make a fundamental error. It is a subtle acquiescence to the idea that Islam is simply a pre-modern religion that has to find its place in the modern world. So soccer is what really matters. And for Muslims to matter, they have to matter to soccer. So we look for Muslim soccer players, and when we find them, we're like, whew, Muslims aren't totally out of it. It's a submission to the idea that multiculturalism means that Islam is no different than Chinese culture or Sikhism. And so you get to wear your hijab at the Olympics, and he gets to wear his turban, and she gets to wave her flag of the Chinese Communist Party, and we're all one human family. But when we teach kids Islam, we use words that imply it is for everyone. The messenger of Allah to all humanity, for example, is one particular phrase I've heard many, many times before. Should we revise it to be the messenger of Allah to those whose grandparents spoke Arabic, Farsi, Turkish, or Urdu? Of course not. That is absurd and a complete violation of the most basic implications of Islamic theology, whether that theology is Ash'ari, Maturidi, Athari, Mu'tazili, Shi'i, Ibadi, or something else. So if that is true, that this messenger of Allah is for everyone, then kids, and sometimes adults, want to know, why should all the peoples of the world stop eating pork? What is the point of that? I have Chinese and white and Brazilian friends who eat pork chops, and they're good people who are contributing to humanity and the well-being of Earth. So what do I do with this particular ruling of Islamic law that everyone, both Muslims and non-Muslims, know? I'm not giving the pork example because that is what a lot of people are struggling with, but because it is to illustrate a point. If Sayyid Tabatabayi's thesis about our bodies is true, that we know instinctually that we didn't make them, and so we are in debt to whomever or whatever did make them, then we are stating that everyone is on the same playing field. Human beings have a particular existential reality that they face. something that is simultaneously a secular and a religious truth. And so let's leave all distinctions between human beings aside as a starting point. We were created by a power other than our own, are given some sort of power for a short period of time, 60, 70, 80 years. In the case of my friends, 30, 40 years. And then it all goes away with death. So what do we do with it? If that is the case, then why pork? What's the point of that? Why does a universal truth, or something that claims to be a universal truth, include a seemingly random food prohibition? Well, answering questions like this involves being willing to speculate, but also the humility to say, God knows best. Wallahu a'lam. But as a student of history, I marvel at the way, for example, that Spanish culture developed a public aspect to pork consumption such that if you travel to Spain today, you will literally see pigs' legs hanging from windows inside shops off the street, and you'll find pork in so many dishes. This is a leftover from the Reconquista, the Catholic reconquering of the Iberian Peninsula from Muslims that took place over hundreds of years. As territories were reconquered by Catholic monarchs, not only was the attempt made to signal to all observers that this was not a safe space for Muslims, but even as Muslim populations were dwindling, they were trying to root out secret Muslims by seeing who would react to pig everywhere and in everything. And so at least at the world historical scale, we can see that pork consumption is actually a discrete data point that indicates the spread of Islam as well as the strength of Islam in varying times and places. It may be the case that the prohibition of pork is not actually about you or me or any other individual, but is rather about the collective ummah as a whole. It may be that it serves as a clear dividing line in sociological terms between Muslims and others. This is made all the more poignant that, in my experience, eating pork is the very last thing to go when someone is on their way out of Islam. It is very common to find Muslims who do not pray all 5 obligatory prayers every day, but they would never intentionally miss a day of fasting in the month of Ramadan. But for those Muslims who have given up on fasting too, the prohibition on pork almost always remains. It's that one last piece of taqwa, that one last willingness to do what God has commanded and avoid what God has prohibited. And so whether or not that is meaningful in the next life is only for Allah to decide. But here on earth, in human history, it becomes meaningful in our collective expression of Islam. Put another way, Islam has been the most powerful force in human history for preventing the cultivation and consumption of pigs. And the cultivation and consumption of pigs has usually thrived in places where Muslims are minorities or non-existent. Now, the reason for exploring this example is to show that it takes a mentality that sees Islam as capable of contributing to the well-being of humanity and all of the earth. If Islam is simply my heritage, well, I don't eat pork, and my parents don't eat pork, and my grandparents don't eat pork, so I don't want my kids to eat pork, then one isn't even going to make these sort of connections or speculate about these sort of realities. And so our articulations of Islam at the individual and communal level have to be oriented towards the universality of Islam for each generation to not feel like their greatest hope is simply representation. I don't want it to be misunderstood, and let me say this very clearly. I don't want it to be misunderstood so that I somehow think greater representation is bad. Not at all. I think that it is wonderful that there are Muslims who get deals with Netflix and Hulu, and Muslims who have won elections, and Muslims who excel at professional sports, and Muslims who have climbed the corporate ladder. My own wife is one of the most accomplished, brown-skinned, hijabi businesswomen in the United States, and she has been featured in the Wall Street Journal. Rather, what I am saying is that Islam, as Islam, is different. Islam is not being Punjabi, or female, or a white American male like myself. Islam is the help and the guidance and the mercy provided by the creator of this earth and this universe to help everyone, including Muslims. This is one of the great and powerful insights of the Shi'i tradition. The Shi'i tradition asserts that from the very early on, Muslims failed to live according to Islamic ideals, and so failed to provide humanity with the beauty that it deserves. We are all constantly called to push ourselves, to not fall into the same traps of shaitan that our Muslim ancestors, whether Sunni or Shi'i or something else, fell into. We are constantly striving and hoping to do things right, while also having the humility to know that just as people in the past failed and acquiesced and compromised, so too might we run into the same deviations. But Allah is always there for us as we strive towards the future, hoping to do better. Our prophets, peace be upon them, are always there for us. The greatest women of history, Fatima, Khadija, Asiya, Maryam, Zainab, and others are always there for us. And for the Shi'is, our Imams are there for us too. May peace be upon all of them. We may find it deeply meaningful to recount the tragedies of the prophetic family, and that may be beautiful and transformative and essential, but the hidden truth is that Muslims are a future-oriented people. We look back on the caliphate, and we can speak plainly about its positives and its negatives, and point out clearly that it only ever affected approximately 25% of the habitable land on earth. So what about the other 75%? The Islamic history of North and South America has yet to really be written. If we believe in Imam Mahdi is the Imam of North and South America just as much as Iraq and Iran. But we have to embrace that mentality ourselves if we are to pass that on to others. In my experience, very few Muslims immigrated to the USA thinking that they were going to bring the universal truth to all the Bachara and Bachari white folks like me. For those of you who don't know any Urdu, Bachara and Bachari is like saying, oh, that poor, poor person in English, someone to be pitied. But that is a truth that we must embrace. I can directly trace my conversion to Islam to the work of Indian immigrants to Chicago who decided they needed to make some books for their kids in hopes that they would retain their faith. And they probably weren't focused on having an impact on my demographic, but they had an impact on me. Alhamdulillah. There was an early white convert to Islam in America named Muhammad Alexander Russell Webb, who stated that he was not so arrogant to think that he had figured out a truth that no one else could, but nor did he think so lowly of himself to think that others wouldn't follow in his footsteps. I've always identified with that statement. I would not be here today if I did not think that of all the different ways of looking at the meaning of human existence, that Islam is not the clearest and most comprehensive. Truth is everywhere. Justice is to be found in all times and places in varying degrees. But Islam is the call for humanity to embrace the totality of truth and to embody the perfection of justice to the extent that we are capable, leaving the outcome of all things up to the one who created us and everything else. So our words must be translations of truth and justice, and our bodies must act out truth and justice for our Islam to be what it is supposed to be. But the difference between that early white Muslim and myself is that there is so much intervening history of Islam in the United States to learn from. Easily the most beloved figure in American history to Muslims is Malcolm X. I have found that this love transcends the Sunni and Shi'i divide, and he is often quoted by both communities. By far my favorite Malcolm X quote is, "I'm for truth no matter who tells it. I'm for justice no matter who it is for or against. I'm a human being first and foremost, and as such I'm for whoever and whatever benefits humanity as a whole." That is a great definition of Islam as far as I'm concerned. And people love Malcolm X, also known as Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, because they see that this quote is consistent with how he lived his life. So we too have to struggle for that level of conviction, coupled with the humility to know that we are not there yet. There are many narrations of the Imams, upon them peace, that state that the true Shi'i is the person whose life and actions demonstrate the beauty of the teachings of Islam. In one hadith of Imam al-Baqir, upon him peace, he states that we should be like Ruhbanun bil-layl, Asadun bin-nahar, monks during the night and lions during the day. These words alone, for example, are indicative of one of the beautiful qualities of our faith, which is that it brings together both worldly and otherworldly virtues, and Islam has called us to aspire to excellence in both. One of the ways that I have noticed some people losing their way is because they lose their balance between these two sets of virtues. This is especially true in regards to the politics of representation. Sometimes someone's personal deen, the way they live their lives, skews towards worldly accomplishment, and they think that if they can become a tenured professor at a prestigious university, or a partner at a respected law firm, or have a popular television show, that they have become the proverbial lions during the day that their faith calls them to be. But are they enough of monks at night that they will not fall into sin and disobedience when a little piece of the dunya is dangled before their eyes? Less common, but still problematic, are those who skew towards being religious at the expense of worldly accomplishment. They have talents and potentials that are undeveloped and misused because they think that as long as they are praying all their prayers and making their regular adhkar, they are doing what a Muslim is supposed to do. But this world we live in is big and complex and competitive, and it requires Muslims to be audacious, to live in a way that actually demonstrates their faith. As an example of this, I'm reminded of the guidance provided by Sayyid Ali al-Sistani to the fighters in Iraq in their battle against ISIS. As a student of history, I felt that this was the greatest treatise of the ethics of modern war I had ever read, regardless of whether I was a Muslim or not. If Islam cannot confront our realities, then it will be overwhelmed by them and will remain only as a refuge of the socially powerless. Sayyid Sistani understood instinctually that Muslims needed to fight to rid the world of ISIS, and that was the only time in his career that he ever called people to commit acts of violence. And yet he knew that if they did not live up to high ideals on the battlefield, it would be for naught. In contrast to ISIS's wanton destruction of everything that did not conform to their ideology, Sayyid Sistani wrote unequivocally that, quote, never inflict harm on non-Muslims, regardless of their religion and sect. The non-Muslims who live in predominantly Muslim lands are under the protection of the Muslims in these lands. Whosoever attacks non-Muslims is a betrayer and traitor, and rest assured that such an act of betrayal and treachery is one of the most repugnant acts in accordance to innate nature and the religion of God, unquote. And his advice regarding those these men would have to face on the battlefield, Sayyid Sistani reminded them that, quote, know that most of those who fight you are victims who have been led astray by others. Do not let those who led others astray be better than you. Let your righteous actions, your well-wishing nature, your just conduct, your forbearance, and your avoidance of extortion, sin, and aggression serve as an example for them. Whosoever helps misguided souls find the path of righteousness is like the one who saves a soul from perdition, and whomsoever misguides a person knowingly, it is as if he has killed them. As we hear in a hadith of Imam al-Rida, the eighth Imam upon him peace, لَوْ عَرَفَ النَّاسِ مَحَاسِنَ كَلَامِنَا لَاتَّبَعُونَا. If people knew the beauty of our words, then they would follow us. This is a conditional sentence. People need to know the beauty of the words of the Ahlul Bayt upon them peace. This involves translation work as well as the more formal process of teaching the tradition. But as we know, it is not just the words of Ahlul Bayt that are beautiful, it is also their embodiment, their lives, their actions. Yes, they were bodies in the world just like other bodies, but in the words of the Ziyara Jamia Kabira again, وَفِعْلُكُمُ الْخَيْرِ وَعَادَتُكُمُ الْإِحْسَانِ. Your actions were the embodiment of good, and your habits were excellence personified. And so too must we strive to be. We cannot wait for others to inspire. We must try to be inspiration ourselves. We must try to be reflections of the beauty of Islam. I, as an individual, am inspired by the legacy of Malcolm X right here in the United States of America. And I'm also inspired by the legacy of Sayyid Sistani over there in the Middle East. One played a role in why I became a Muslim, and the other has played a role in deepening my faith. Muslims are often inspired by other Muslims, but often simply based on the politics of representation. But, and I mean to be a little bit provocative here, none of that is particularly inspiring to non-Muslims. Yes, there may be times when one of those things plays a role in someone's journey to Islam. For example, I recently had a conversation with a young man who wanted to know more about Islam because he saw a comedy show about Muslims. But let me be blunt. No one is going to become Muslim and practice Islam because of that show. They're going to become Muslim because watching everyone prostrate in unity before the Kaaba is a beautiful symbol of human diversity under the shade of divine unity. They're going to become Muslim because my family or your family is ethical and charitable and generous, and we welcome them into our homes and answer their questions. They're going to become Muslim because they read a beautifully published version of the biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him and his family, or a well-translated and commented upon version of the Quran. They're going to become Muslim because their innate quest for truth and justice aligns with what they have experienced of Islam. They will hear the beauty of the words of the leaders of our faith, at the forefront of which is the Quran, and they will follow. A scholar from Syria once mentioned that many of the fiqh questions, the Islamic law questions these days, are actually questions of kalam, Islamic theology. By this he meant that fiqh only makes sense when you have already bought in wholeheartedly to the idea of God, tawheed, prophets, nubuwwah, and a life after death, akhirah. If one has doubts about those things, it is not particularly relevant where you hold your hands during the qiyam, the standing part of the salah, the ritual prayer. So our faith has to be rooted in these theological universals. That is why people even ask the question, why? In regards to something like the prohibition of pork. Why? No one debates that this is the rule in Islam. It's al-ma'room min ad-din bid-darura, as they say in Arabic. It's necessarily known to be of the religion that if you went to all different corners of the earth and you ask people, well, what is something Muslims can't eat? They'll say, they can't eat bacon. No one debates that this is the rule. But they want to know why. Why would the God in charge of this entire vast universe, that you see all those galaxies in the Hubble Space Telescope, and the James Webb Space Telescope, billions of galaxies, light trillions of light years away or whatever it is, one who manifested this entire reality, why would they tell us we can't eat pig? Doesn't God have better things to do than worry about if I eat bacon? Mm-hmm. If Islam is, for someone, is nothing but outward symbolism, then all they're going to see during a soccer match is whether or not this or that player is outwardly identifying as a Muslim. But if Islam for them is an expression of the collective destiny of humanity, then they will see that everyone on the field is a reflection of the creator, the originator, the shaper, al-Khaliq, al-Bari, and Musawwir. They will see that the World Cup itself represents human aspirations for one global community living in peace and healthy competition, which is precisely what Imam Mahdi is meant to bring about. And they will be reminded that the strength of the divine gift that will be taken away in old age and death for everyone. Our age is one of marveling at human excellence and ingenuity, and so we will not survive this age spiritually without remembering that everything that is human is built on the divine. The great heresy of our age, the one that Muslims young and old in the East and the West all suffer from, is the age of ar-ra'a wastaghna. They think themselves as self-sufficient, as it says in Surah Al-Alaq. From the very beginning of the revelation of the Quran, the idea that human beings were self-sufficient was put under attack. The Quran engaged in a constant polemic with its audience to get them to admit that everything that they were was not an accident, but rather the outcome of a process whereby God wanted to place a being on earth with greater potential than any other. This belief that human beings are islands unto themselves, alone in a meaningless creation meant to create meaning through their human imagination, was there in the 7th century. For the Jahili Arabs, the pre-Islamic Arabs, there was temporary comfort in wine and song and poetry before oblivion came, just as there has been for the nihilistic aesthetes of Euro-American colonial modernity for hundreds of years. But death is still there to be reckoned with. كُلُّ نَفْسٍ ذَائِقَةُ الْمَوْتِ ثُمَّ إِلَيْنَا تُرْجَعُونَ. Every soul shall taste death, then you shall be brought back to us. I have met numerous young, attractive, intelligent, driven Muslims who have explained to me that the moment they really became serious about their faith was when someone close to them died, and all of a sudden they didn't feel so invincible. It is only when we fully embrace the reality that we are going to die that Islam makes sense. So there are aspects of the journey that we just cannot control. You can raise a Muslim to understand intellectually that God is real, and you can explain to them rationally how the reward and punishment are part and parcel of how the creation works, and thus part of the next life as well. But until they have seen it with their own eyes, it just doesn't sink in as deeply. Until belief resonates emotionally, it's just abstraction. These are the moments that none of us can control, but which are part and parcel of how Allah directs our lives. As it says in Surah Al-Ankabut, verse 2, أَحَسِبَ النَّاسِ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. Do the people suppose that they will be left off because they say we have faith and they will not be tested? You can't say I am a Muslim and not be tested by Allah as to the truth of your claim. Maybe that test won't be like the Rohingya people who have faced a genocide at the hands of the military forces of Myanmar and yet have held on to their faith. Maybe that test will be when one of our friends unexpectedly dies, and we have to really ask ourselves if we believe they are alive in the barzakh. Because if they are, then every Thursday night it would be good for us to recite some Quran for them or give some sadaqah on their behalf. Maybe that test will be a new set of opportunities and possibilities that are exciting and exhilarating, but they involve a series of significant compromises in our faith and practice. Maybe the test will be purely in our own heads, and we will live lives of ease and comfort compared to the vast majority of humanity, but struggle to see Islam as universal and Allah as real without taking the necessary time to strive to understand it with our best effort. It is well established through Quran and Hadith that Allah tests some people with prosperity and others with tribulation. In general, the tests we face are the tests of prosperity and ease. When I have spoken with young Muslims over the years who are struggling with their faith, there is one clear theme that runs through it all: the desire to be free. The desire to be able to taste anything, touch anything, go anywhere, and be with anyone. Little do they know how much more they have tasted, touched, done, and seen than the vast majority of human beings who have ever walked this earth. They were not born in a village somewhere 800 years ago, destined to farm the same land that their parents and grandparents farmed, never even knowing, let alone seeing what was on the other side of the planet Earth. Rather, now they live in Chicago or New York or San Francisco or London, and they have pleasures and delights and possibilities that most human beings in history have never even dreamed of. So when they read Quranic verses about couches and gardens in heaven, they're unmoved. Why would I want a couch in heaven when I already have a big wraparound couch with a sectional in my living room, with a 50-inch flat screen on the wall streaming thousands of options? Instead, when you probe them about heaven, it's about travel and relationships and experiences that they feel they're being denied here on earth. And often, the basis of that denial is somehow wrapped up in how they were taught to be Muslim. Don't do this, don't do that. What would the community say if they knew? And so on and so forth. And so they feel trapped between an Islam of denial and a global world of possibility. But what if we reverse those ideas? What if we talk about Islam as the pathway to endless possibility? Not only a complete and fulfilling life here on earth, but never-ending expansion and journeys after we die. And the earth itself is a place of denial. Denial of our hopes, denial of our ideals, denial of the full expression and potential of our humanity. For as Muslims, we do not believe that we are born to die and end our story here on earth. Our journey continues in the stars, and we do not need to spend billions on rocket ships to get there. The same one who created the Andromeda galaxy created me, and that one can show me everything I've ever dreamed of, and far more that I could never even imagine, even if I were to live for 1,000 years on this planet. This resolves the great heresy of self-sufficiency. This way of looking at Islam means the 21st century is to be embraced fully. There is no need to hide. There is no need to be afraid. We are followers of the Imam destined to unite the globe. And all of us are collectively servants of the creator of this planet and every other planet. That is what our faith is teaching us. That even though that we, Muslims, are not the majority of humanity, and our beliefs are not reflected in the economic, political, and cultural trends dominating the world right now, that we are in submission to the processes of history that will bring about the ultimate victory of Islam. This is the truly audacious aspect of believing in Islam. To acknowledge your smallness on earth, but to truly believe, like Abraham, upon him peace, before us, that our individual journey to God has meaning, even if everyone around us thinks it is ridiculous. Because that is what we often forget about the Quranic stories, that most of the people thought the prophets and their followers were ridiculous and preposterous. The Quran itself anticipates this common psychological challenge to belief. But being in community, as we are here right now, helps us to reaffirm our beliefs. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. We encourage each other towards truth, and we encourage each other towards perseverance, when other people might think we are ridiculous. And so this is why we must think of Islam for ourselves and in the way we convey it, not just to young Muslims, but to all others, as a universal truth, as containing the fundamental answer to the mystery of human existence on earth and what our lives are meant to be lived for. Do we think that the martyrs of Karbala lost something that day? Did they lose the opportunity to travel, to hold political office, to create art, to fly into space, to fall in love, to build a company, or any other human endeavor that people have striven for in history? Or did they gain everything because they sacrificed their lives for God, as embodiments of Surah Al-Ahzab, verse 23? من المؤمنين رجال صدقوا ما عاهدوا الله عليه فمنهم من قضى نحبه ومنهم من ينتظر وما بدلوا تبديلا. And among the faithful are people who fulfill what they have pledged to Allah. Of them are some who have fulfilled their pledge, and of them are some who still wait, and they have not changed in the least. So we are all of those who are still waiting, hoping that we can draw inspiration from the exemplars of our faith to face our own challenges, to know that whoever finds Allah has lost nothing, whereas those who have lost Allah have lost everything. To know that death is not to be feared, but rather the thousands of ways that the living forget. And to know that we are citizens of the entire earth because we serve Malik al-Mulk, the possessor of sovereignty, who is sovereign over all human beings. Walhamdulillah. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
That there is a concept of like a one true Islam, right? Like Islam is an ideal, that it exists. But the thing that has always bothered me is that with it, it seems like there's also this idea of the one true Muslim. And the reason why it especially, I guess as a Shia especially, it never makes sense to me why people bring up that this ideal one true Muslim. If you are a Muslim, you do this or do that, or don't do this or don't do that. That there are some things that literally disqualify you from being Muslim. And like, obviously being Shia is one of them, right? Is it our ritual or our beliefs that disqualify us from being Muslim? Is it, and I think that the thing that especially bothers me about this idea of like the one true Muslim is that like, if there are really 5, perfect Muslims that have ever existed, they were all literally different people, right? I don't think Bibi Fatima alayhi salam would have made the same choices as her father. She literally couldn't, right? And I don't know, I think that, I guess the question here, because this is a question, is that, like, if there is an idea of one true Islam, do you also believe that there is also this pervasive idea in the community of the one true Muslim? And do you believe that it's pernicious?
That's a very, very deep question. Thank you for that. As a convert, the first phase that I went through was like, what's the base level that I've got to attain before I what's just a decent Muslim? So this is very true, but I joke about it. Like, if you open any book of fiqh, the first chapter is called Bab al-Tahara, the chapter of ritual purity. Like how to be in a state of, your body's in a state of ritual purity so that you can make the prayer. It literally took me like 5 years for that to become like normalized. Like washing myself regularly. Like it was just a totally different conception of, physical cleanliness, and like the conception of my own body is like, is my body ready to pray or not? Or is there something on my body that shouldn't be there? Like it was nothing I ever thought about before. But I looked around the Muslim community and I didn't find like an alternative. It was like everywhere you go, Hanafis, Malikis, Shafis, Salafis, Sufis, all these different perfect, forms of being Muslim. They're all saying I gotta wash myself and learn how to do ghusl and do wudu and these things like that. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I just gotta do it. And in a way, what that taught me was that there are these kind of broad universals in Islam that, because of my personal experience, I experience as like the most real form of Islam. But for all of my Muslim friends, because they were rooted in one particular community, they didn't look at it that way. Instead, they're like, well, my parents taught me to be this kind of Muslim, and we do it like, we have to say this thing on this night in this way, and and some things are religious and some things are cultural, and when they get to college, they're trying to untangle it all. And so I realized that my kind of like sociological experience of being Muslim was heavily weighed in the favor of like, what is the broad parameters that help us to feel like we're going in the right direction? And all of those kind of forms of like the perfect Muslim didn't make a lot of sense to me. They're like, well, okay, that's good for Sheikh so-and-so, who's memorized so many books and done so many prayers, and every single day they got up at 4 a.m. and said, 100 extra rak'ahs of, prayer. Like that, I don't even know what to do with that. Let me just sort of table that for now. And then I think in addition to that was the experience of being Muslim in the United States of America, where there was no single dominant form of being Muslim. And so I was very early on exposed to very different communities with very different ideas of what that perfect Muslim should be. So my experience of like becoming a Muslim and growing into the community as like a member of the community was actually one that really heavily downplayed that. And what I've found over the years is that there's like, I can't really speak for other countries because I've only ever visited other countries, and it's very interesting, and I've tried to learn what I can to bring back to like my life in the United States. But for the United States, there's sort of like a public-private element to being Muslim, where, like what I was saying in the speech, right? If we see some Muslim who's in a public position of power and authority, we're like really amazed if they're like practicing Islam. Like, oh, that person is a Supreme Court justice and they make their 5 prayers. Whoa! Like that. I remember when I was younger, this guy who I knew was older than me, I went to Brown as an undergraduate. He went off to Wall Street after he graduated, and he told some story about like, yeah, so there I was, and this was an investment bank that no longer exists called Donaldson, Lufkin and Jenner. He's like, yeah, I was in this meeting at DLJ, and I was like, oh, it's time for Salatul Jummah, and I just walked out. And then the boss was like, hey, Zayed, where are you going? He's like, it's time for my Friday prayers, and he was just like, didn't know what to say, and he just walked out. And I was like, he is the greatest Muslim that ever existed. Like, he was like, no powerful white man on Wall Street. I need to worship my Lord. Like, super Muslim. You know, and that was my conception of like the perfect Muslim then, you know, because it was like the American mainstream was always something that didn't have a place for even like the value of the 5 prayers or the value of fasting the month of Ramadan. I think it's different now. It's just in the late 90s. Like there's a lot more awareness of those sort of basic things amongst the broader American community. But what it taught me was this kind of, what I believe, this sort of fundamental theological principle that I see over and over again in the Quran that I think is the fundamental challenge to this idea of the perfect Muslim, which is that, you know, I could quote different verses, but like, وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ, as I mentioned in the speech. He is with you wherever you are. Right? If Allah is with you wherever you are, and is closer to you, as the other verse says, in your jugular vein, right? Your exaltation or your debasement or your righteousness or your lack thereof or whatever you want to call it is really only you in that moment with Allah, in that moment of like, do I go right or do I go left, right? You know, when I was a chaplain, one of the most amazing forms of Islam to me, like amazing expressions of piety, and maybe this will resonate for some of you, maybe it won't, but I hope it'll make my point, was when a young undergraduate would fall in love with another student, and after struggling for a time, would come to a clear realization that that person was not very good for them, like spiritually, ethically, for their long-term well-being. And they put their own spiritual autonomy above that emotion and above that desire and said, you know, this is the hardest thing for me to do right now. It feels like the world is ending. And they would share this with me because I was their chaplain. It feels like the world is literally falling apart for me. But I know what I have to do and I know that it's right. And for me that was like, oh, like that was just unbelievable. It was, you know, it was just like, you know, it seems so mundane, but I would literally in those moments be like, that is what faith is. That person in that moment really believes God is real and really wants to construct a life for themselves that is in tune with what they believe God wants for them. And they're willing to give up the thing that every poem and every song and every novel and every movie has ever been written about. And they're willing to give up the dream because they feel that sense of certainty. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be that way. I'm not saying that like, that's the paradigm of the perfect Muslim falls in love and leaves that person behind. May Allah bless you all with fulfilling love lives, fulfilling romantic lives, you know, and Jannah. You know, that's not my point, but my point is to say that, you know, it taught me that for that person in that moment, like that is the battle of Badr for them. That is Karbala for them, right? Like they're not asked to go off and, you know, fight some war, or they're not asked to go off and study for 20 years Islamic law. They're not asked to memorize the Quran. They're asked to like take stock of where they are right now and then begin to walk in the direction that they believe Allah wants them to walk in. And when I went through that, it just totally destroyed the concept of the perfect Muslim, right? And it's just very hard for me to, you know, really believe that is the case. That there's like this, you know, sort of almost like you know, if you live like hierarchical organizations often have these org charts where there's like level A, level B, level C, and if you're at level A, you get like $99,000 to $120,000 salary, and if you're at level B, right, like there's some sort of chart for being Muslim, and there's like 3 people at level A, and like 27 people at level B, and the rest of us are down at like level Y and X. You know, it just, that doesn't make any sense to me. And I don't believe that with even the Quranic stories about all the prophets and all their different life experiences. It's like tilka ummatun qad khalat, as it says in the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad when he's telling God's telling him the stories about like Prophet Yaqub and people that came in the past. That's a nation that passed away before you, and they're going to have what they earned, and you're going to have what you earned. You're not going to be asked about what they did. So even the Quran is telling the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like, don't worry about Yaqub. You don't have to know everything, all of his challenges, all of his struggles. Like, you got to do what you got to do. And that to me is like the only way that Islam makes sense to me, is that it's like a journey that you're on and you're on and you're on and I'm on and he's on. And, you know, we help each other with tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. But like at the end of the day, only Allah really knows, you know, who's where. It's not for us to decide. I hope that made sense. But that being said, what you said is very true. It exists. This very powerful idea in the Muslim community, but I just hope that few words explain why it doesn't make sense to me in that sort of way.
Islam being something that speaks in contrast to what we see as prevailing notions of prosperity and advancement and technological innovation, and we're all richer and better, and we're all more fortunate than anyone in human history, and everything's going great, right? As opposed to a much more deeper, ruminative understanding of who we are and where we're going. How do we grasp this? Is Islam easy and it's really chill and you just have to do a little bit and we're going to be fine, or do we need to lock ourselves in a room and really grapple with these deep questions of who we are and where we're going?
Well, what I said is a response to the lack of fulfillment that I've seen when people sort of say, well, Islam is just like, I make my prayers, I fast the month of Ramadan, I don't really think about it too much. You know, because then when it gets hard, when somebody dies, when there's tribulation in society, when people are fighting each other, you know, when there's some great moral upheaval, what do I do? I think in the Shia tradition, that's why the story of Karbala is so paradigmatic, because, you know, on the morning of Ashura, when Imam Hussein alayhi salam was there before the thousands of people on the other side, there were people just going about their business hundreds of miles away, going to the masjid for Fajr. You know? They didn't know. Now, were those people responsible to be there and to help Imam Hussein? Only God knows. Only God knows who knew what was going on. But the way the story is recounted every year is a story where the idea is conveyed that at certain moments in human history, you have to stand up and be counted. And you have to be, as we say in English idiom now, on the right side of history. And so, you know, like there's a famous story in the story of Karbala about a man named Hur, right, who was a general on the other side and who in the last moment realizes he's on the wrong side and joins Imam Hussein and perishes, protecting the prophetic family. Now the story is always told like as this paradigmatic story about, you know, person repenting and taking the right path and you know, fighting the good fight. But who was Hur? Like, you know, he probably had a family, he had his likes and his dislikes, and he had his journey, and he had his ups and his downs, and he probably had his sins, and, you know, he was just a regular guy, and who knows why he joined the army in the first place, right? But in that moment, he says, as it's narrated, he says, I see myself between heaven and hell, right? And that's the same story that's in the Quran in terms of different moments, right? The Battle of Badr is, you know, one that, you know, is often recounted in the Sunni community regularly. You know, when the Prophet ﷺ said, okay, you know, now it's time to fight. Many people didn't want to fight. And the Quran says, you know, it may be that you hate something, but it's good for you, right? So they didn't want to. And we often forget that. Like, you think that the people at the Battle of Badr wanted to go and face off against their cousins and their uncles in battle? No, they didn't want to do it. They just wanted to go back to Medina, build our business, our trading business, 20% annual return, mashallah, and spend it on a nice house. You know, but that in that moment, the Prophet of God said, no, you have to sacrifice at a greater and deeper level. And that's what I'm trying to get at, which is that, you know, yeah, most of our lives, like to be honest, okay, there's all these highfalutin words. You know what my big struggle is? My two kids. Like, I'm trying to like do spread a paper, and my son's like, Abba, 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 something happened at school today, and Lincoln said this, and okay. Wallahu musta'an. Yes, my son. Like, let me just completely forget my world of adults and like focus on whatever is going on in your world. You're hungry, okay. Let me get you, because I work at home. I have all my books at home, so it's like this constant struggle. Or like we have a full-time childcare provider for our 1.5-year-old daughter, and she knows I'm in the room with all the books, and so I hear her go, Abba! And then she runs in the room, and she wants a hug, hugging, she says hugging, and she wants to get on the couch and sleeping, and she wants me to lie down and go sleeping, and I just have to stop what I'm doing, and like, okay, this is what it means to be a father. That's my Karbala. Not to say that it's a great struggle all the time. It's also wonderful and beautiful. I'm, joking, but it is true. Like that, mashallah, things are fine in our neighborhood in Oakland, and things are fine in California, and fine personally, right? And then maybe there's a personal tribulation. Someone gets sick, and you have to stand and be counted. Or maybe there's a societal tribulation. But the point is that the dunya forces us into these moments, right? So in my moment, it's, am I going to be that father that is attentive to my child so that my child, when they go to college, don't go to their Muslim chaplain and say, my father did this to me, and my father did that to me, my father didn't love me, and my father didn't care about me. But they're like, oh, mashallah, my father was great. Inshallah, I hope they say that. They're probably going to hate me, but I don't know. I had this one mentor here. He's not here right now. There's a brother who used to be involved in this community back when I was living here.
What's his name?
Sher Abdul I saw him in Washington Square Park once, and I had my young son who was 1 or 2 at the time, and I was talking about raising him, and he said, one day he's gonna ask you for something, and you're gonna say no, and he's gonna go, you've never done anything for me. And at that moment, you just have to stop yourself, and you have to remember, he doesn't actually mean it. He means you didn't do the last thing that I asked you to do. And wallahi, that process is already starting. And it is jihad an-nafs. It is overcoming your own personal world, right? There's this famous speech by David Foster Wallace called "This Is Water." And he talks about like everyone walking around with tiny skull-sized kingdoms. Like every single one of you is like a little skull-sized kingdom. You're in your own world, and we can't actually have any real human connection. One of the purposes of Islam is about the deepness of human connection. The story of Karbala is about the deepness of human connection. The story of the Battle of Uhud is about the deepness of human connection. The people say, I will put my body on the line to defend Prophet Muhammad and Imam Hussein. I would rather that my body gets slashed apart than to have their body get slashed apart. Just as a father would say, I would rather I die than my children die. And so, yes, like there's a lot of kind of daily life, just doing your thing, taking stock of where you are. But then there are these moments where you have to dig deeper, and that's what I'm talking about. So I hope that helps resolve the tension,
It's said that Islam started as something strange and it's going to end as being strange. In this world, we, as humans, we want to be relevant. We want to be part of what's going on around us. How does one balance being Muslim and kind of struggling to be relevant in today's world?
I'll be very blunt. I think that is ultimately a personal decision that is taken in consultation with those you trust the most. Like I have worked out over the years my own sense of like comfort in that process. Like, for example, I left Princeton University's PhD program because it just wasn't working for me. It was too secular. And now I'm about to finish my PhD, inshallah, at a school that is much less prestigious, to be very blunt. But I'm okay with it, because when I went to that school, it's everything I wanted a graduate program in religion to be. It's been an amazing experience. And I had to move across the country to go to it. But I love it. And it's like a dream come true. Like I love the inter-religious quality of it, and the fact that there are all these Muslims from different backgrounds, and they can all speak their truth, and we can all learn from each other. And so, you know, maybe someone would say, oh, you know, David should have finished his degree at Princeton, mashallah, it's so prestigious, and he would have more doors would have opened to him. But I crossed that bridge, like I faced that challenge, and I just made my decisions. And you know, is it right or is it wrong? I don't know. But you have to live with it on this earth, and then you have to be ready to stand before Allah and say. So actually, when I had left my program to get married, and when I went back, this is back at Princeton many years ago, we moved actually to New York the first time. And I said to Allah, I said, Ya Allah, I'm going back to Princeton to get a degree for your sake. But I didn't specify the PhD. So when I got to the MA level, when I got everything done where you get the MA, then like all of a sudden there were like all these roadblocks. Like it's a whole long story. But it's like I tried for a year to like get my dissertation like off the ground and like approved, and it just was like constantly frustrating. And then I had to be like, and then there's a whole other story to it about my wife going to Harvard Business School, and like, you know, it's like all these things happening at once, and I was just like, and I remember I had like the first time in my life where I had a long out loud conversation with Allah, like just kind of like, not like I'm in dua and I'm really feeling it, but like I was driving back from visiting my wife. I was like, what do I do, Allah? I was like, Ya Sami, Ya Basir, Ya Alim, Ya Khabir. Okay, here we are. I'm in the car. I got 3 hours on the Mass Turnpike. What do I do? You know, okay, well, I could, you know, and I talked it out with a lot, and then I was like, I felt 100% at the end. I'm like, I'm leaving Princeton, and I'm moving to Boston to be with my wife at Harvard Business School. And, you know, I've never regretted that decision. And, you know, so, you know, how can anyone tell me that my decision was wrong unless they say, well, I don't know, I had a dream of the Prophet, and they said, David Coolidge was wrong. And, oh, crap. You know, but that's why I say the Rahbanun bil layl wa Asadun bin nahar. You know, monks during the night, lions during the day. You know, these competing values. You know, you want to be pious, you want to be connected to your tradition, you want to be rooted in your faith, but you also want to be relevant. You also want to be part of your society. You also want to not pass up opportunities. You know, like me personally, I've always avoided going to Washington, D.C. Anytime anyone has been like, hey, come to the State Department, no, thank you. That's my personal decision. I'm not comfortable. You know, I'll go talk to my city councilwoman in Oakland, California, you know, but I'm not comfortable with that. That's just a personal decision. But another person might be more pious than me, and then they go and they become like a elected official or, you know, work at the State Department or something like that. I mean, that's their decision. You know, the reality is that we all have to face, which is like a whole nother lecture, but is we're free. Right? We're free to choose these things for ourselves. Right? We have to, at some point our community, as a collective American Muslim community, has to embrace the reality, which is already the truth, but we just don't talk about it, that we're all free to leave Islam tomorrow. Right? We all know people who have left Islam. Right? It's just, and they just go about their lives, you know, and they choose different things and they live their lives out, and that's how it is. It's not that way in other countries, right? And we recognize that, but that's how it is for us here. And so when we recognize that freedom, that means the burden of having to create our own lives and create our own balance between worldly aspiration and, you know, religious commitment, or however you find that sort of sweet spot of those two things. And I personally, like, I don't feel comfortable after all these years of studying, after all these years of reflection, judging someone else's choice. I may choose very differently myself, but I'm not going to say, like, I know for sure that this person did it wrong and I did it right. I just don't. I just don't have that ability to see into the unseen realm and to know what God thinks and to see the secrets of their hearts. And so it's best that they conceive of it as a journey that they're on with Allah in consultation with those whom they trust most. Wallahu a'lam. I think that's helpful.
Thank you.
Maybe we'll take one final question just in the interest of time, if there are any.
So there's a hadith, and I apologize, I don't know the
lines of every people have a fitna, and my people's fitna is wealth. It's actually quite common where I grew up in Pakistan, and I see elements of that quite a bit in Muslim communities across the world, right? Dubai is like the place to go to. Even though we don't have a prosperity gospel, I see elements of that in Muslim communities. Can you talk about that a little bit? And because you did allude to the fact that we are a very privileged people, we have a certain level of exceptionalism living in the United States, and I see that as a means of Muslims actually straying from the deen. Obviously, I was saying this from my own observations, right? I can't tell how religious somebody is, but I personally find that as a very problematic thing for our communities at large. I feel like there's a growing distance between the deen and the people because folks seem to be going so much towards materialism these days.
I'll just speak about it in an American context, and then whether it's relevant for other situations. One of the fascinating things about American history is people call it pragmatism, right? Like we don't necessarily have like a worked out vision of law of like that how law is supposed to be in theory. It's more like, is it working right now or is it not working right now? Like it's like when the founders like with slavery, they're like, oh, let's put that off for now. Then all of a sudden 500,000 people got killed in a civil war over it. It was like, hey, we should have dealt with that earlier, right? Like, is it indicative of like the American, kind of mentality? Like, if it's working now, let's keep going with it. And with that mentality comes a kind of like, winner take all kind of approach. It's like sports. Americans love sports as a whole. Maybe some of you individuals don't like sports, but I'm trying to make a cultural point. Why do people love sports? Because there's a sort of arbitrary set of rules, but then at the end of the day, there's like a clear winner and a clear loser. And then you get to like yeah, that person won doing the thing with the arbitrary set of rules, and then that person lost. And so you there's no like clear meaning to the game of basketball, or baseball or football. It's just like a thing we do. But then you get like, you can clearly see that some people are incredibly gifted at it. And all of a sudden, like, they're showered with money, they're showered with fame, they're showered with sexual opportunities, they're showered with power, rock stars, similar thing. In politics is too. It's like we have this election system where you just pick these two people and you gotta choose one or the other, and then the one wins, like, yeah, the winner. But that was just the system that was created because that was what people thought would be the most effective. And so, like, at the core of a lot of American culture is the idea of being a winner, right? Is it like, I'm Jeff Bezos, I won. I'm Donald Trump, I won. I'm Joe Biden, I won. I'm X or Y's Supreme Court Justice, I won. Right? And whoever falls into the championship category, the election winner category, or the top of the charts category, I'm gonna make some terrible. I'm Selena Gomez. I won. I don't know who's popular these days. And I'm not looking at you. You don't know anything. And in a lot of respects that works, right? And in a lot of respects, that's what makes America possible, because it is kind of arbitrary and random. Like, why did we all of a sudden, like, everyone loved Netflix? And then, so Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix, becomes a billionaire because we all pay $7.99 a month for Netflix. Right? It just happened. Right? Now, obviously, like, it's not random. Like, he thought about human psychology and he tried to create a system that would, like, deliver us our dopamine. And then, like Starbucks, like, get them hooked on caffeine. Like, I contribute to the well-being, the wealth of all of the coffee industry because of my addiction. But what Islam is saying is that that's true. But there's also an otherworldly calculus for it, right? So, like, for example, in the Quran, we've all heard the verse of Quran that compares giving in the way of Allah to this grain of corn, and and this ear of corn, and it has so many grains on it, and so for each of those grains, you're getting. So when you actually do the math, it's saying you'll get a 70,000% return on your investment, right? It's saying that like you're going to beat all the Wall Street, stock analysts and all the hedge fund managers. Like if we put it in our terms, it's like if you give $1,000 to the IC, let's assume that's a legitimate expense in the way of Allah. If you give $1,000 to the IC, because you're doing it with the right intention, and because it's for the sake of Allah, and it's for the sake of human beings coming together to remember Allah and to tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr, that $1,000 in the eyes of Allah is multiplied by 70,000, or 700 technically, and that is your return on investment. It's quantifiable. The Quran speaks to a trading community that actually did this kind of work. I put in essentially, 1 dinar of wealth, and I wanted to get 2 back from sending my camel caravan to Syria. Like that was, a lot of the business back then. And it's speaking to that mentality and saying, okay, yeah, that's true, and that's how the world works. And because that's the way the world works that way, which I created, there's also this other hidden or unseen way of calculating out your actions. And so I want you to reorient your purposes to not be solely based on this worldly return, but based on this otherworldly set of possibilities, right? And so yes, I can, but it's not either or. Yes, I can spend on my family. If I become wealthy, I can spend on my family. I can have nice things as long as they're like halal and things like that. But then if I choose to spend something that's not for my own benefit, but for the benefit of the community, I give 1,000. Every year I keep track of who gives to the Rohingya community. Because they basically need about $950 million to sustain 1 million people in the refugee camps in Bangladesh. And every year, the international community is unable to reach that mark. It's very depressing, but it is what it is. But one year, a Qatari businessman himself gave $50 million. And so it was like you were looking down the list of international donors, and it's like United States of America, Norway, United Kingdom, Sheikh Ahmed ibn Ahmed, or whatever his name was. And I was like, wait, what? $50 million? And so I looked it up, and this Qatari businessman went to the UN and went to their, they have a zakat program for refugees. And he, for whatever, I don't know how he got that money, but he gave $50 million, right? Or we look at, Mackenzie Bezos, the ex-wife of Jeff Bezos, and how much money she gave to so many organizations, giving billions of dollars away. May Allah reward her for that. And so what Islam is trying to do is to get us to truly believe, in this unseen reality that is going to actually have a real reward, sort of possible for the sake of actually believing that it's true and acting based upon it, even if it doesn't bring about necessarily worldly rewards. And so, if for example, if you gave $1,000 to if every time you gave $1,000 to the IC in sadaqah, if all of a sudden your stock portfolio went up 20%, you just keep giving money to the IC. You're like, okay, I see how it's working. Cost benefit analysis, $20,000 goes up, 20% up. $1,000 goes up, 20% up, and then all of a sudden, all the Chinese Communist Party would be giving, $1,000 to the IC because they'd see, the value of their holdings go up because the Chinese Communist Party is very pragmatic. Wait a second, this thing, if you give money, you get money? But that's not how it works, right? I mean, sometimes it happens, but sometimes it's not that way, right? It has to have an element of faith and a belief in the unseen. That's absolutely integral to Islam. So what happens is that we struggle with that. We struggle with the sincerity of our belief in those things. And that is something that we all face in different varying degrees. And I think so that hadith about the test is wealth. Wealth is so palpable, it's so real, and it becomes a means to everything else. Right? Just the way that when you get elected to office, all of a sudden everybody cares about you. All of a sudden, like, everyone wants to know what you have to say. Everyone invites you to, to speak. If you all of a sudden have a best-selling book and it's on the New York Times bestseller list, all of a sudden, like, everyone wants you to talk to, about this, that, or the other thing. Well, I was the same person I was before I went to the New York Times bestseller list. So if I had something to say before it was on the New York Times bestseller list, like, but people don't think that way, right? It's like in New York City. It's like when you see the restaurant that has all the people like lined out. You're like, ooh, what's going on there? I can go check out that. They got the best scones in New York City, right? Because it's like there's a palpable and meaningful return on investment. But what Islam is trying to get us to believe is that there is actually, this world that is far more great than this world. Like everything that's wonderful and beautiful in this world is in that world in a far more exalted manner. And it's not that we have to become monks all the time to get it, the way that some people have thought in human history. But we just have to like put things in their proper place. And so again, to this point about is Islam hard? No. Giving the absolute minimum of the charity that we give actually is not that much money, right? But there may be times when we actually have to be like that Qatari businessman and give the $50 million to the Rohingya if all of a sudden Allah gives us that wealth. And I think that's the challenge, is knowing when we need to push ourselves and knowing when, the reality is that like we can't, we are still kind of like clinging to this earth. And we're still in need of validation by the systems of earth, as opposed to validation by this divine system. Wallahu a'lam. There's one more question. Can I ask? She's had her hand up the whole time.
Yeah.
All right, real quick. I'll try and be brief.
Okay, alright. I'll try to be quick too. So basically, it's kind of building off of her question. I think it's a really good question. But maybe I'm ignorant for this because I think it's really noble to say sometimes that you don't know, like Allahu A'lam. Sometimes it's like only God knows. But I think it's really black and white. Sometimes, like for example, with Dubai, the entire city or country of Dubai was built on slave labor. Same with NYU, same with Oklahoma in general, same with Saudia. Like all of these countries that we see as like, oh my God, these great Muslim countries that are so wealthy. Well, they're wealthy for a reason. There's an imbalance somewhere. Same with like America or France. The entire soccer team in France is like mostly African people who are taken from the African continent and like operates essentially like money and stuff like that. And people, they commend France or like these European countries for doing that, but there's a reason that France has so much and Africa has so little. France wouldn't have so much, but Africa has so little. And so I don't know. I think I don't really know where my question lies, but I'm not gonna lie, because also I don't understand Muslims who are Copts and also Muslims. I feel like there's a contradiction there, as well as like Muslims who feel like, I don't know, money. I really don't know. There was like, I took a lot of notes like all over the place. You said something about like a Supreme Court justice praying 5 times a day, and like how we think that that's so ridiculous. And I don't know. I think that that's like a valid thing to think is ridiculous, because I think the institution of the Supreme Court, as well as institutions of America, and like I don't know, offices and positions that defend the state are inherently anti-Islamic. But I don't know. If you look in the past and the present, yeah.
I understand what you're getting at. It goes back to what she was asking about, which is like this balance between, like a religious ideal and kind of worldly realities. I can't answer that question for everybody because different people have different sensitivities, right? It's like we know, for example, that Abu Dhar, the companion, he was incredibly sensitive to wealth disparity. And he would go around the city of Medina and call it out to other Sahabis. And he got banished because of it. And so, Abu Dhar is like a reminder to us that even amongst, the earliest generations of Muslims, they had different kind of approaches to these questions, right? There were some people, that became incredibly wealthy because of the conquests that the early Muslims went under, and Abu Dhar was like really, really critical of that, and he was like, how can you expropriate all this land? How can you take all this wealth from people, and then just kind of bring it back to Medina and live your life? So, even in those kind of like idealized early moments of Islam, we feel that this is, part of the reality back then. So what ends up happening is that, every human being is tasked with adhering to what they truly believe to be like, the ethical law that they're bound by. Right? So one person says, well, I pray 5 times a day and I go to my work and I don't know anything. I was in India. I was meeting this brother that I met on Facebook. He just happened to live in the city that I was in. We had dinner, and then he was like, I'm so busy working for this outsourcing company, just trying to make enough money for, like I'm seen that way. I cannot but be American. Like it's part of my culture. And so if that's the case, like how do I deal with like American realities? And that became like a whole new trajectory of like years and years of reading and reflection and getting involved in different like activist groups and organizations, and that's a whole nother sort of series of lectures probably. But the point was that it came from the place, which is my reality, but it maybe isn't someone else's reality, that I had to deal with like the American space and the American set of circumstances and the American realities and make choices. And so like I said, I don't go to Washington because I don't, not, there's a lot of injustice that has happened because of the federal government. And I moved to California and live in Oakland for a reason, right? As a way to try to, choose a place where I felt like, it was good for us to raise our children. It was good for me to be involved. Barbara Lee is our representative. She's the one person in House of Representatives who voted against the Iraq War. Those things were meaningful to me. And but at the end of the day, I'm still American. I'm still bound by this system, right? And I still, have to face what that means. Whereas another person, they are tied to another national reality, and they're going to have to face what that means for them. Like, I can't even imagine what it would be like to be an Emirati. I couldn't even begin to imagine what it would be like to actually be an Emirati, and what that would mean to like how you live your life. So I just leave that up to Allah, So I hope that's helpful for all of you. At the end of the day, I hope my point is that, every single one of us actually has to figure these things out on our own. But the reason we have community, the reason we have things like Sacred Door and we do these things is to hopefully generate beneficial and positive and guiding principles and ideas for us to bring into all of our own contexts. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. May Allah forgive me for anything I said that was wrong. It's from my own weaknesses and my own ignorance. And anything that was beneficial is from An-Nafi', the source of all benefit. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala alihi. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.